Welcome to Ham and Jam, the World War II British Airborne podcast, hosted by Andy Bryant and Kevin Getz.
Gentlemen, in spite of your excellent training and your splendid briefings, you must not be daunted if chaos reigns. It undoubtedly will. Welcome, listeners, to another episode of Ham and Jam, the Airborne podcast of the Second World War. I'm your co-host, Kevin Getz. For those who are not familiar with the quote, I will let you know that has been attributed to Brigadier James Hill. Sitting down here in the horse and groom, I've ordered my pint, and I see my good friend, Andy. How you doing?
Evening, Kev. Yeah, I'm not doing too bad, mate. Looking forward to this one as ever.
You know what? This is going to be a really interesting. We are going to do another Airborne Personalities episode. Before we do, I've already ordered my drink. I'm going with a Duvel Belgian Strong Blonde. And as Andy knows, I have a particular favor for the Belgian Blonde. So Andy, what are you drinking?
Well, there's a joke there, mate, but I'm not gonna lower the tone by going there. Actually, mate, I'm under MO's orders on this episode, so you are sitting down before I say this. But yeah, due to the fact that I'm finishing off a course of antibiotics, I'm gonna forgo a pint of the black stuff this episode, and I'm actually going to be drinking some Pepsi Max. But it is in a pint glass.
I'm speechless. I don't even know where to go with that. It was not an answer I was anticipating on hearing, but that being said, cheers.
Cheers.
So Andy, you and I had talked for a while, and we've done a couple episodes already on airborne personalities. And I think it's such a great opportunity for the listeners to kind of find out who these men were that were in leadership positions that were able to guide the British Airborne along its historical path. Because I think what's so interesting, again, is, as we've said before, this thing just there was no history behind it. There was no culture behind it. It was developing its culture and its history as events were happening in real time. So to have leadership like a James Hill, truly extraordinary in how he is able to set the path for 3rd Brigade.
Absolutely. As you say, it was a steep learning curve. I mean, you've got these airborne personalities in the early days that don't just stay with, say, the 1st Parachute Brigade or the 1st Airborne Division. You've got these personalities that then filter across to the new 6th Airborne Division, and James Hill was one of those.
Yep. So let's dive right in and find out who this guy was. Stanley James Ledger Hill, born in 1911. He is the son of Major General Walter Pitts Hendy Hill. He attended boarding school at Wesley House Broadstairs, then moved on to Marlborough College. Hill freely admitted that he wasn't necessarily an exceptional academic student. He seemed to have a plethora of these guys that just weren't necessarily great students, but as he admitted, excelled in prowess, athletics, and the officers' training corps. And I thought this was quite interesting. He said, "It was a hard school with no physical mercy. To say I enjoyed my time there would not be true, but it did me no harm." And that kind of has a ring of C's get degrees, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. I mean, but it does go to show that you never can tell. And there is a saying, all the gear and no ideas. I think that's applicable to all the degrees, and doesn't mean to say that you've actually got any common sense.
Yeah, I think we've all known people when we've gone to university that there were, as we say, book smart, but not common sense smart. He attended Sandhurst in 1929. His father had served there as an instructor. And Andy, for a lot of our listeners here in the States, what is Sandhurst?
At the time, it was a Royal Military College at Sandhurst in Berkshire in the UK. It didn't actually become an academy until 1947. And at the time, it was only for potential army officers of the infantry and the cavalry. And I think the closest analogy, it was basically the British equivalent of West Point. So you're going to have prospective officers that are going to go into the infantry and the cavalry of the British Army. That's where they're going to go, and they're going to learn how to be officers, basically. In modern times, it's certainly not an easy time at Sandhurst because obviously you're going to be a potential leader. So basically, it's the British equivalent of West Point.
And it's so funny because we just get done reading this quote about him where he, it didn't do me any harm, but I wasn't really having any kind of fun with it. but he becomes a recipient of the Sword of Honor and the Sword for Tactics.
Well, so the Sword of Honor was awarded, and I think it still is, to the best officer cadet of the intake. And it's actually a very prestigious award because it basically means you've come at the top of the class. So I think in my time, I don't know if they still do this, but they used to call potential Sword of Honor recipients, they used to call them Blade Runners.
It's so interesting, this, as you said, academically is not a sign of what kind of leader he's going to be. But yet when he's in Sandhurst, suddenly he starts developing the skills and he's getting the reputation of being that leader. He becomes commissioned with the Royal Fusiliers from 1931 to 36. And where is he seeing action first?
Well, he's first seeing action as part of the British Expeditionary Force in 1940 in France.
So he's going to France, and I found this quote most fascinating. It's from his mother. She gives him some advice, and she says, James, if you're going to survive this war, you're going to have to learn to harden your heart. And I thought that was rather interesting. So what is he doing, and how is he involved in France?
Well, he's with the 2nd Battalion of Royal Fusiliers. They go out in 1939. He does actually recount a story of being up on the Maginot Line, which I found quite amusing. It's at Christmas time, 1939. And his brigadier visits and he's showing them around. And it just so happens that at this time, the Germans decide to send a reconnaissance aircraft, which they've got a guy on an anti-aircraft gun. I'm presuming it's probably a brain gun or something on the anti-aircraft mount. But he recounts a story of this guy obviously opens up on the reconnaissance aircraft, and as he's spinning around, he actually trips over the mount. The mount falls down, and he nearly wipes out the Brigadier, which apparently the Brigadier was well chuffed about, apparently. But he manages to calm him down. He'd actually been sent what we used to call an aid parcel. He's been sent a hamper, a Christmas hamper from home, and he gives the Brigadier some of his Christmas hamper, and it seems to sort of calm the Brigadier down before he leaves. So I thought that was quite amusing. He then moves on to be part of Lord Gort's staff, who was obviously the commander of the British Expeditionary Force.
Yeah, so as it turns out, and this is really attributable to his ability for organization and control, and he ends up becoming responsible for refugees. In other words, how do we get them organized? How do we get them off the roads so that we can ensure that the BF is withdrawn and it's not, we don't have refugees getting in the way. So he ends up becoming fully engrossed in that. And because of those efforts, he ends up receiving a military medal for that. So, we often talk about the evacuation. And again, here's an individual who's got a role in making sure that that evacuation is successful.
Yeah, and as you say, he's really down to movement of refugees and the logistics side of the withdrawal. And he's getting out and about there. He's getting in the thick of it, and he's witnessing the German blitzkrieg firsthand. And I'm just going to, a quick quote of his. As he's out and about one day, I'm presuming in a staff car, because this is pre-Jeep days, I decided to return to the command post while there was a sporting chance of getting through. I therefore set off towards St. Omer, taking an easterly route. However, when I was about 5 miles from Calais, we swung around a right-angle turn, only to find a farm cart placed across the road. Behind it was a German armoured car which opened fire, but fortunately we were able to back around the corner and get away. The Boche having made a mistake of placing his roadblock 50 yards from the bend in the road. So he's in amongst it, even though he's in on the staff position, he's getting in amongst it still.
Yeah. And clearly that is going to pay dividends, as we shall see, in his military future. So this says a lot about his commitment to getting back in action and doing what's asked of him. And you've got to relay that story about him falling asleep, going across the channel, and then he finds his way back.
Yeah, so he's, as part of his duties, he's sent off to liaise with Major General Andrew McNaughton, who was commander of the 1st Canadian Infantry Division, and they were intended to be landed at Calais. So Hill goes off to liaise with McNaughton, and then he asks for a lift back to Calais, or lift to Calais, on a British destroyer with the Canadians. So the Canadians, they set off for Calais on this destroyer. They're attacked by a German plane, which is seen off by a Spitfire. But in the meantime, Hill falls asleep, and while he's asleep, the Canadian operation at Calais is cancelled. So they actually steam back to England. So when Hill wakes up, he's back in England, and he's like, I don't want to be in England. I need to be back in France. So he actually manages to get back to Dunkirk to rejoin Gort's staff, but he actually travels across in a ship full of explosives, which are bound for the engineers in France for blowing up bridges, etc., after they're retreating from the Germans. So yeah, I mean, he's no slouch. Again, it's another example of he's got a duty to perform and he's going to do it.
Yeah, you said it. Clearly, he is committed to whatever his duty, whatever his orders are, he's going to see those through. So he gets his way back across the channel as part of the evacuation. And then we see this new regiment being formed. And he joins the parachute regiment in 1942. And we have heard of people join the parachute regiment. Well, one, they liked the concept of this beret, or maybe it was more pay, or, maybe I could get some more of the girls that the RAF guys are getting. Would you care to explain why Mr. Hill went ahead and joined the parachute regiment?
Well, I'm going to quote again from James Hill. So this is what he has to say about it. Shortly after Winston Churchill issued his directive for the formation of an airborne force of 5,000 men, my batman, who I had retained with great difficulty, asked permission to volunteer. I said I would give the matter due consideration, and after 3 days said I'd let him go. However, the thought of being looked after in perpetuity by anyone else was much too much for me, so I also volunteered in order to get him back. So make of that what you will.
I never thought that would be on the checkbox list of join parachute regiment to get my Batman back. That wasn't on my bingo card.
And I think he's actually saying that with his tongue firmly in cheek.
I would say probably so. So he becomes major, and he's in the 1st Parachute Battalion, because we don't have a 6th Airborne Division as yet. And a Captain Miles Whitelock remarks about choosing the 2nd Command at then CO Lieutenant Colonel Eric Down, which this is really interesting. There is a sense that Down is going to be promoted. So we're looking for a very highly qualified, highly experienced number 2 who's going to take his position. So they're almost like looking for the CO when the CO is already there. And this is what Whitelock said. He said, "It did not take me long to realize that the tall, fit-looking figure of Major James Hill would suit us well, and I was able to say so when asked my opinion by the commanding officer." So in a regiment that has no culture and no history, Major Hill is he's already showing his leadership. His subordinates are seeing this. And I think that really speaks highly about who Major Hill is at this point in his career.
I mean, he's physically an imposing figure. He's a tall guy, so he stands out. But he's one of these guys that leads by example. That's obviously standing out even in this early part of his career in airborne forces. As I say, he's already proved in France he's a go-getter, and he's leading by example.
Yeah. So he gets promoted to lieutenant colonel. He replaces Down. He becomes the CO of the 1st Parachute Battalion. He sees right away that morale is a little bit low. It's suffering. So he moves the battalion to Exmoor by train. They disembark at Dulverton. And then at that point, he goes, okay, he tells the whole battalion, we're going to march to Exford in full kit. Andy, what do we talk about when we say full kit?
Well, I'm presuming that's full marching order, which is probably going to be their 37 webbing. I presume they're going to be in smocks, helmet, 37 webbing, small pack, large pack potentially, weapon. But they're basically in full marching order. It's not a light load, especially if it's raining, because that was the weight.
Yeah. And what's interesting is Hill is leading from the front. He's right up there. And Whitelock makes this comment. We set off early in the morning. James Hill, once again at the head of the column. He inspired us all by his physical fitness and enthusiasm. And Andy, you've served in the British Army. What does it mean for you as a soldier on the line to see an officer leading from the front?
I mean, I can give an example of an officer that I'm not going to mention names, and I'm not going to say where and when and times and dates and all the rest of it. So he will remain anonymous. But he was actually one of my officer commandings, squadron leader. And whenever there was, and we're talking about an operational tour here. We were going through, obviously, physical fitness, etc., runs, and he would always be at the back, huffing and puffing like an old steam train. When we did our fitness tests, you had a certain amount of time that you used to run a mile and a half, best effort, individual effort, and even though he had a little bit more time than the rest of us because he was slightly older, they make adjustments for when you get to a certain age, he was still coming in at least 30, 40 seconds above that limit. So he was not passing his basic fitness tests when we were doing it. And bearing in mind we're on an operational tour here. And in the end, he just stopped coming to Squadron PT, which, the lads didn't think much of, and I was one of them. And it was just like, and we got to follow this bloke? To me and to a lot of guys, leading from the front, leading by example, showing that you can do what the lads are doing and then some. You don't have to be a tyrant, but leading by example. And it's a cliche, but it's very true.
It's kind of like the same thing a little bit with us, the Indiana State Police. We direct traffic at the Indianapolis 500. When I've got a lieutenant that's standing in the intersection with me with cars stacked everywhere, people honking, exhaust going, and sweat rolling down your body armor. It means something to the guys that work the road. That I got an officer, I got a guy that I follow right next to me, and he's in the crap with me.
Absolutely.
There is something to that. So we end up in North Africa. And so what's going on here with the 1st Parachute Battalion in North Africa? We're not talking full division, correct?
No, it's basically the 1st Parachute Brigade. So you've got 1st, 2nd and 3rd Parachute Battalions, of which obviously James Hill is the commanding officer of the 1st Battalion. They're basically going to go out there to support operations after Torch. And the 1st Battalion are going to fly out. And Souk El Arba is where they're going to drop. It's not the full battalion because they're relying on the Americans because the RAF haven't got the planes. So they're going to be going out there in DC-3s. And they're basically going to drop on the 16th of November 1942 in Tunisia, as I say, Souk El Arba, and there is a road and rail junction at Baya, which they're going to be tasked with taking. They're basically there to harass the Germans and also to bring the French on board or to assess which way the French are going to go. In a nutshell, that's what they're going to be doing.
Yeah, which is a critical time right here because, France is still Vichy, England and the United States doesn't know, which side is France going to be on. And again, this is a great example of his quick thinking and Hill's leadership. So he takes the battalion and he decides to march them through Bayeux twice because he needs to, I'm going to convince the French to join the Allied cause. And so this is what Captain Whitelock notes. He goes, we marched through the town wearing steel helmets and then doing so again attired in our maroon berets, thus giving the impression that we were twice our actual strength. It seemed to work because from then on, the French were completely cooperative.
Yep.
So pretty good thinking from Hill on his part. And we have this battle in November 22nd on a hill called Guy, approximately 9 miles southeast of Sidi Nasir. So what ends up happening and what ends up happening to our man Hill?
Basically, what you've got is they had intelligence that the Germans and the Italians were massing around that area. It was a mixed force, as I say, Italians and Germans. So the 1st Parachute Battalion are going to assault some hills, or a hill, that the Germans and Italians are set up on. They've got armour there as well. And Hill typically is leading from the front again. And again, I'm going to quote from Hill. I soon realised that the enemy were firing 1 in 7 trace from the hill just above my battalion headquarters. After 4 minutes or so, I could not stick it any longer, so took 3 good chaps and climbed up to see what the form was, only to find 3 light tanks dug into the side of the hill, firing apparently at random. On close inspection in the moonlight, I saw they had small peepholes let into the side. I put the barrel of my .38 revolver through one of the holes and pulled the trigger. The bullet went whanging around inside, whereupon the turret hatch shot open and some Italians leapt out shouting, Italiano, Italiano. The same thing happened with the second tank. It was far too good to be true. However, when I went to try the same procedure on the third tank, the peephole was shut, so I banged on the turret with a thumbstick I always carried. This time, when the turret shot open, a great big German came out. I sensed he had a weapon, and as he jumped down, he shot me through the chest, neck and shoulder. He was a brave man. So, yeah, it just goes to show you at that time you could take out an Italian tank with a .38 pistol and a walking stick.
You don't want to go down that road of classifying him as there's another one of those British eccentric military leaders, but I never would have thought that a .38, a walking stick. So he goes back for medical treatment and ultimately has to be evacuated to Algiers. And then Major Alistair Pearson ends up having to take over command, doesn't he?
Yeah, so Alistair Pearson, future commanding officer of the 8th Battalion when the 6th Division is formed. So Hill's off recuperating and Pearson is put in charge in the meantime. The plan is to replace Pearson with an incoming officer. And Hill goes to see the Brigadier and he says that it'll be a travesty because Pearson has been commanding the battalion in Hill's absence. And he voices his sort of objections to that. Basically says Pearson should stay in charge. So the funny thing about this is he actually elicits the medical officer in a plan, and Hill's replacement, or Pearson's replacement, he's actually deemed unfit for duty by that medical officer with a case of severe piles. So he gets sent back to Blighty, and Pearson is promoted and takes command of the 1st Battalion, which I thought was rather humorous.
Yes. And I think, too, in the humor of that story, it says a lot about how, as you had said earlier before we started recording, how loyal he is to his subordinate officer. But I think it also is a reflection of Hill knows his officers, and he knows Pearson is fully capable of leading. I got to believe, and I'm sure you got to believe, too, if Hill had no confidence in Pearson, he never would have done that. So that tells me right there that Hill knows his people. He knows who's a capable leader and who isn't. He's still committed. He wants to get back to his men. I thought this was hilarious. He ignored doctor's orders about exercising, and so he would leave his room without anybody knowing, so he would walk around the hospital garden. He declared himself fit. He didn't wait for the doctor. And so he walks out of the hospital and reports to Brigadier Edwin Flavel, and they got nothing for him. So December of 1942, he returns to the UK, and that's when he's offered the command of the 9th Parachute Battalion. And this is where he earns the nickname Speedy. And this is what Major Alan Perry said. The colonel invariably picked on a different officer each day and said, "Come along and walk to the office with me." The walk was a breathtaking experience. James Hill invariably carried a thumbstick, which increased the length of his stride. His speed of movement often left the unfortunate officer trotting a couple of paces behind his master, trying to answer his questions, but with insufficient breath to do so. The colonel quickly earned the name Speedy from the soldiers. That is a great quote and a great description. And it's vivid that I can just absolutely picture Hill walking around with his walking stick about 3 paces ahead of everybody.
As I say, he was a big bloke and he had a long stride anyway, but just supremely fit guy, supremely fit.
Yes. And what's really interesting too at this time period, Andy, is Hill isn't CO of the 9th Parachute Battalion for very long, is he?
No, I mean, I think he's made CO of the 9th at the beginning of February, and by the end of February, he's promoted to Brigadier and given the 3rd Brigade.
Yeah, and I don't know about you, but I thought this was fascinating. I had no idea. This little factoid came at me completely from right field. He replaced Gerald Lackbury, who ultimately was sent, as we know, to command 1st Parachute Brigade.
All these names, they just bounce around within the British Airborne Forces from battalion to battalion, from division to division. You've got Alistair Pearson, you've got Geoffrey Pine-Coffin, James Hill. They all end up in the 6th Airborne Division. And then you've got the Ox and Bucks and the Royal Ulster Rifles, who are part of the 1st Air Landing Brigade. They end up as the nucleus of the 6th Air Landing Brigade with the 6th Division. They're all being rotated around. You know, the experience is being shared around all these new formations.
Yeah. And just as like a little sub, as we kind of take a little rest area diversion here, it is an interesting time period, isn't it, for the British Airborne? Because, like you said, you're moving experienced folks around. You're seeing the creation of another division. As we've always said, it's developing its culture and its history in real time. They're flying the plane as they're building it, which I find just absolutely fascinating.
A lot of these battalions are also being converted to the airborne role once they realise that relying on volunteers is going to take too long to build up these 2 divisions. So they start converting regular infantry battalions to the airborne role, either paratroopers or air landing. So you are getting experienced troops, you are getting the nucleus of formations in these battalions. But yeah, the only true volunteer brigade amongst the new airborne forces is really the 1st Parachute Brigade, 1, 2 and 3 Battalion. They're the originals, they're the volunteers. After that, it's infantry battalions that have been converted to the airborne role.
So he becomes Brigadier of 3rd Brigade. Who is comprising 3rd Brigade?
In 3rd Parachute Brigade, you've got the 1st Canadian Parachute Battalion under Lieutenant Colonel Bradbrook. Now, Hill is very pleased to receive that. And I think he obviously had some experience working with the Canadians, as I recounted that story, from the Dunkirk evacuation. So he'd obviously been amongst the Canadians before, but he seems very, very pleased to be having the Canadian Parachute Battalion. He's got the 9th Battalion, which is ultimately under Terence Otway, and he's got the 8th Battalion, which is under the command of his old friend Alistair Pearson.
And initially, though, wasn't the 7th Parachute Battalion supposed to be under 3rd Brigade? They get moved to 5th, and then that's when he takes the Canadians.
So the 7th, originally the 10th Somerset Light Infantry, again, one of those battalions that were converted to the airborne role. They join with the 12th Yorkshires and the 13th Lancashires, who become the 12th and the 13th battalions, respectively.
Yeah. And I thought this was really interesting. What he said was, I was, of course, absolutely delighted at having the Canadians, albeit very sad that I would have to relinquish the 7th Parachute Battalion, which henceforth would form part of the 5th Parachute Brigade. And for our listeners, old and new, I would direct you to our very distinguished guest, Norma Graham. We had a couple episodes, didn't we, Andy, where she was talking to us about the role of the 1st Canadian Parachute Battalion during Operation Overlord and also during Operation Varsity.
Yeah, so you've got the Normandy episode is entitled Hell and High Water, and the Varsity episode is, funnily enough, called Hill's Cowboys. If you get 5 minutes, look them up because they're excellent episodes, even if we do say so ourselves.
Yes, this really dovetails in what Hill's thoughts were of the Canadians. He said the battalion was very similar to my old 1st Parachute Battalion, in that it comprised men who wanted to fight, and the sooner the better. They didn't want to sit out the war in Canada. These men had flown from their homes 3,000, 4,000 miles away to stand in our midst and share our burdens in what was our hour of need. And you read a quote like that, or you hear a quote from him, and now you can fully understand why the Canadians really loved him the way that they did, because he really showed himself as an exceptional leader.
They probably fitted in with his get up and go. He mentions, in one of his quotes about their enthusiasm, prior to D-Day, going around the two different camps, the British and the Canadian camps, and seeing the difference in, not to say the British weren't enthusiastic, they were just a bit more laid back, whereas the Canadians were itching to get in the fight. And I think that probably sums up a little bit of Hill's psyche almost. I think that's probably why he felt so endeared to the Canadians and vice versa.
Absolutely. We're in this period where there's intense physical training activity. We're preparing for the cross-channel invasion. Hill talks about, we lived our training. If a man did not make the grade, we could chuck him out. And this possible threat provided a salutary stimulant to all and sundry. And he really wanted to focus on 4 objectives for his brigade. And that was speed, control, simplicity, and fire effect. So I'm going to ask you, one of the things he talked about is his emphasis on speed was because paratroopers don't carry much equipment. So why do you think he's emphasizing here speed is important?
Well, I think it's also speed. You can also say aggression as well. And firepower, as you mentioned, is going to win. It's all about winning the firefight. It's dominating the enemy. As far as airborne force are concerned, I would say speed, as you already alluded to it, is they're going in light anyway. So they need to get, it's that thunderclap surprise element. And where have we heard that before? It's getting onto that objective as soon as possible. I mean, I've always said that I think airborne forces are 25% attacking and 75% defending. So they've got to have that speed and aggression to actually take their objectives with surprise initially. And then in most cases, they're then digging in and defending and holding those objectives. But like at Arnhem, speed. It was all about speed, especially if you're landing 7 to 8 miles away from the objective. Now, Hill had got his men up to 10 miles in 2 hours. So you could argue that Arnhem, on a good day with no opposition, they could have been on the bridge in 2 hours, maybe. But obviously, we know that there was opposition. So, but yes, so that's for me, winning a firefight, aggression, speed, getting in there, I think are massively important to airborne forces.
Yeah. And then he also mentioned control, which is paratroopers are expensive. So let's not just let them run wild. And I kind of wanted to get your thoughts on this. His concept of simplicity. And his idea is let's keep things simple so that fewer mistakes are made.
I mean, when I was in, we had an acronym KISS, KISS. Keep it simple, stupid. A machine with lots of small moving parts is more prone to break down. When I was doing research for this episode, it did bring to mind when I read that myself, that Hill put the emphasis on simplicity. It made me think of Terence Otway's plan for Merville, actually, which, if you read it on paper, was horrendously complicated. Some might say overly complicated. Alistair Pearson certainly thought it was overly complicated.
Yeah.
But Hill did back him. Hill apparently talked to Neil Barber on one of our Normandy episodes. He did say that Hill backed Otway's plan and said that Otway was just trying to keep his guys alive. So interesting one, that one.
And it's interesting, too, that you bring that up, because I think, again, that goes back to Hill understanding who his battalion commanders are, and he trusts them implicitly with their tasks. I just want to give another example of the type of leader he is. He drafts a letter to Hilario Barlow, because Barlow is the CO of the 7th Parachute Battalion. He's going to become deputy commander of the 1st Air Landing Brigade. And this, again, speaks to who Hill is as an individual and who he is as a military leader. And he says, I would like to take this opportunity to thank you personally for your very loyal and helpful support of me, particularly during the very trying 6 or 7 weeks when I was acting commander of the brigade. Once again, I wish to say how sorry we all are that you have now left us, and wish you the very best of everything in your new brigade. And I can't think of a better stopping point, because we're going to get into D-Day and what his career up to this point is going to put him in position to be able to do for that cross-channel invasion. So what do you think, Andy? Does he deserve 2 parts?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. If Boyd Browning can get 2 episodes, I think James Hill definitely can get 2 episodes.
Well, with that being said, I've finished my pint. I don't know about you, but
yeah, I can't believe it, but I'm nearly at the bottom of my pint of Pepsi Max. It's horrendous. But I promise normal service will resume in the next episode. Sorry, for our listeners, Kevin is just at the moment just coughing up a lung at the fact of me drinking Pepsi Max and not my favourite Guinness. But anyway, yes, so we are getting the eye from the landlord, unfortunately. So it is going to be time, gentlemen, please, on another episode of Ham and Jam. You will hear us on the next one. We envisage the second part of this episode will go out in the next few weeks. It might be interspersed with another episode, but it won't be long before you can hear what happens to James Hill, D-Day and beyond. It just remains for me to say thanks, Kev. Another great episode.
Another great episode. Thank you, my friend.
Thanks for tuning in. Don't forget to give us a like, subscribe, or a comment on whatever platform you're listening to. And a note on that, if you can give us a like and a comment, it really does help the algorithm on the different platforms. It means that our content is being engaged with, and it does mean that we show up on more searches and we actually get to spread the message. Don't forget as well to tick the little bell button to get notifications so that when new episodes come out, you are notified and you don't miss any. Anyway, that's now all out the way. I can now say, Kev, raise your glass, mate.
It's up, my friend.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Ham and Jam.
Thanks for listening to Ham and Jam. If you enjoyed this episode and want to help Andy and Kevin make more, please support them on patreon.com.
Andy, it's up, my friend.